It started in the most ordinary place, by the office elevator. But the way two women cornered me that evening, smiling as if they knew something I didn't, changed everything I thought I understood about attraction, timing, and the quiet pull between strangers who suddenly feel far too close. It was one of those evenings when the office felt unusually still. Most people had already packed up and left, their laughter and chatter trailing down the hallways hours ago. I was tired, my mind fogged from staring at spreadsheets all day, and all I wanted was the quiet hum of the elevator to take me down to the lobby and out into the night air. As I pressed the button and waited, I noticed two women standing just a few steps away. Amira and Sana. They weren't just colleagues, they carried themselves with a kind of grace that made the office seem smaller whenever they were around. Both were in their early 40s, elegant in different ways. Amira had this sharp presence, the kind of woman who seemed to notice everything without needing to say much. Sana, on the other hand, had a softer warmth about her, like she could ease the tension in any room just by smiling. I didn't expect them to walk over. But they did. Almost at the same time. And before I realized what was happening, they were standing on either side of me. Not too close, not inappropriately, just close enough that I could feel the shift in the air. Close enough that the faint brush of Amira's sleeve against my arm made me more aware of myself than I wanted to admit. The elevator doors opened with a chime, and the three of us stepped inside together. The space suddenly felt smaller than it had any right to be. Amira leaned back against the mirrored wall, crossing her arms casually, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than casual demanded. Sana stood quietly on my right, her shoulder just grazing mine as the elevator doors slid shut. That little touch, it was nothing, really. An accident of space. But the warmth of it spread through me in a way I couldn't shake. I caught a trace of jasmine perfume, delicate and faint, probably Sana's. At the same time, Amira's perfume was sharper, more defined, with a hint of spice. The two scents blended in the elevator's stillness, and suddenly the air felt thicker, harder to breathe in. They smiled. Not in the polite, distant way people in offices usually do, but in a way that carried a quiet weight. As if they were sharing a private joke, one I wasn't sure if I was part of, or the subject of. My pulse quickened, and I tried to focus on the glowing numbers above the door, but my reflection in the steel showed what I was trying to hide, a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. The ride lasted only seconds, but it stretched in my mind. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged, humming with something unspoken. By the time the elevator slowed to the ground floor, I knew this wasn't just an ordinary encounter. The way Amira's gaze had pinned me for a second too long, the way Sana's shoulder hadn't moved away even when she had the chance, it left me with a question I couldn't shake. What did they see in me that made them smile that way? After that elevator ride, I thought the moment would fade into the blur of office routine. Just one of those small encounters that lingers for a few hours before life pulls you back to its usual rhythm. But I was wrong. If anything, it was the beginning of something I couldn't quite put into words. In the days that followed, I started noticing Amira and Sana in ways I hadn't before. Noticing them because they seemed to be noticing me. At first, it was subtle, an extra glance when I passed their desks, or the way their conversations paused slightly whenever I entered the break room. It wasn't the kind of attention that screamed for recognition, it was quieter, deliberate, like they wanted me to feel it rather than hear it. Amira had this sharp wit that cut through meetings. She always asked the questions no one else dared to, and her voice carried a kind of authority that demanded attention. Yet when she spoke to me, her tone softened. She'd stop by my desk with files, explaining details I probably could have figured out on my own, but her hand would linger just a second too long when she placed the papers down. Once, her fingertips brushed mine as I reached for the folder, and though it was the lightest touch, it sent a current through me I wasn't prepared for. Sana was different. She never pushed her presence the way Amira did. Instead, she seemed to move around me with this quiet grace, like water flowing around stone. She'd lean against the edge of my desk during breaks, her hair falling forward so that the faint scent of her perfume drifted toward me. She asked me questions, about my studies, my plans, my family. Simple questions, but the kind that lingered because they felt genuine. She wasn't just making small talk, she was pulling little pieces of me into the light, pieces I didn't usually share in the office. What unsettled me wasn't just their presence, it was the way they balanced each other. Amira with her bold confidence, Sana with her gentle warmth. And me, caught somewhere in between, unsure of how to respond. I wasn't used to being seen this way, not by women like them, women who carried years of experience, elegance, and a kind of quiet power that made my 20-something life feel both small and suddenly significant. There were moments I caught them exchanging glances across the room when I was nearby, a flicker of amusement in their eyes, as if they knew something I didn't. It wasn't mocking, it was softer than that, like they were sharing a private understanding that I'd been unwillingly invited into. And each time it happened, I felt myself drawn in deeper. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it. But late in the afternoon, when the office grew quieter, and Amira's laughter carried across the hall while Sana's eyes met mine over her coffee cup, I couldn't deny the truth anymore. Something was happening. Something subtle, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. And though I didn't yet know where it would lead, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I didn't want it to stop. It was a Thursday evening when it happened. The kind of evening where the office felt half asleep, papers stacked high on desks, the sound of keyboards fading one by one as people trickled out. I was about to leave when I heard Amira's voice behind me. "Coffee?" she asked, lifting a paper cup in her hand. Her smile carried that same mix of confidence and something unspoken, something I still couldn't name. Before I could answer, Sana appeared beside her, holding 2 stir sticks and looking at me with a quiet warmth. "Stay for a while," she said softly, almost like a suggestion, not a request. "It's nicer when the office is quiet." I hesitated, my bag already slung over my shoulder. But there was something about the way they stood there, waiting, not pushing, just offering, that made me set the bag back down. We ended up in the small break room at the end of the corridor. The lights were dimmer there, the air faintly carrying the smell of old coffee grounds and printer ink. But with them, it felt different. Almost intimate. Amira leaned against the counter, stirring her drink, while Sana sat across from me at the small round table, her elbows resting gently on the surface. At first, we talked about work. Deadlines, projects, the kind of surface-level chatter that fills time. But slowly, without realizing it, the conversation began to wander. Amira spoke about her early years in the company, how she had to push harder than everyone else to be taken seriously. There was a flicker in her eyes as she said it, a glimpse of the battles she had fought quietly. Sana, in her calm way, admitted she sometimes worried about fading into the background. "People stop noticing after a certain age," she said, her voice low. Then she looked at me, her eyes soft but searching. "But not everyone, right?" The question hung there, and I felt my chest tighten. I shook my head gently. "Not everyone." A silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, like the air is filled with words no one dares to say. The steam curled up from our cups, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the vending machine in the corner. Amira broke the stillness with a laugh, leaning closer, her eyes catching mine. "You're too quiet," she teased. "What are you thinking about?" I swallowed, trying to find words that wouldn't sound foolish. "Just, how different this feels. Sitting here, like this. It doesn't feel like the office anymore." Sana smiled, her hand resting on the table near mine, not touching but close enough that the space between us felt charged. "That's because it isn't," she said softly. "Not tonight." And she was right. In that small, ordinary break room, something shifted. The 3 of us weren't just co-workers anymore. We were something else. Something fragile, unspoken, but real. When I finally left that night, the world outside felt sharper, colder. But inside me, there was a warmth I couldn't explain. A warmth that came from two women who, without saying much at all, had made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. The following week, something changed. It wasn't dramatic, but I could feel it, like the shift in the air before rain. The usual rhythm of the office carried on, papers shuffling, phones ringing, people hurrying past. But with Amira and Sanaa, the energy felt quieter, heavier. One evening, I stayed late again, finishing up some reports. The floor was nearly empty. As I stretched at my desk, I noticed them together by the wide glass windows that overlooked the city. The lights from the buildings outside flickered against the glass, casting soft reflections of them both. I thought about leaving quietly, but something in the way Amira's shoulders sagged, uncharacteristically, like a weight she couldn't disguise, made me pause. Almost without thinking, I walked over. They looked up, and for a moment I felt like I had intruded on something private. But then Sanaa gave me a small, almost grateful smile, and I knew I wasn't unwelcome. We stood there for a while, just watching the city lights, the silence stretching between us. Finally, Amira broke it. Her voice was lower than usual, stripped of its sharp edge. "You know," she said, almost to herself, "it's exhausting sometimes. Always needing to be composed. Strong. Like you can't afford to let anyone see you stumble." She traced her finger along the edge of her necklace, her gaze fixed on the glass as though she couldn't bear to look at me. Her words surprised me. Amira was always the one who carried herself like nothing could touch her. To hear her admit to the cracks beneath her confidence, it pulled something in me closer to her. Sanaa exhaled softly, her hands clasped in front of her. "She's right," she added. "It's not easy. People look at you differently, once you've crossed a certain line in life. You don't get second chances as easily. You don't get noticed in the same way. Sometimes, I feel like," she hesitated, then turned her eyes toward me. They were gentler than ever, almost vulnerable. "Like the world keeps moving, and I'm slowly being left behind." Her voice caught just slightly, enough to make me feel the weight of her honesty. I didn't know what to say at first. The city outside glittered, cars moving like veins of light through the streets, and here we were, three people suspended in a moment that felt painfully fragile. Finally, I spoke. "I don't see you that way," I said quietly, surprising myself with the steadiness in my tone. "Neither of you." That made them both look at me. Amira's eyes softened, though she tried to mask it with a small, wry smile. Sanaa's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, but didn't. For a brief moment, the distance between us seemed to dissolve. It wasn't about attraction, not in the obvious sense. It was about being human, about admitting the truths we usually hide from the world. And somehow, I had been pulled into that circle of honesty, trusted with a piece of them that few ever saw. Standing there, I realized this wasn't just an office friendship, or harmless flirting, or even curiosity. It was deeper, quieter, and infinitely more complicated. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, but I knew I wanted to be. It was late again, later than usual. The office was nearly deserted, just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the low buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. I gathered my things, feeling the kind of fatigue that comes from too many hours staring at screens, and walked toward the elevator. As I pressed the button, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. I turned, and there they were. Amira and Sanaa, side by side, their pace unhurried, almost deliberate. They weren't speaking, but their quiet smiles told me they didn't need words. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped inside. They followed. The space wasn't small, but somehow it felt as though the walls closed in around us the second the doors sealed shut. The three of us stood close, not by choice, but by circumstance. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that they had chosen this. That maybe, somehow, this was exactly where they wanted me to be. Amira leaned casually against the mirrored wall, her posture relaxed but her eyes steady on me. There was something unreadable in her expression, a mixture of amusement and curiosity, as if she were quietly testing me. Her reflection in the polished steel doors doubled her presence, making it impossible to escape the weight of her gaze. Sanaa stood just inches from my right, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine each time the elevator shifted slightly between floors. The touch was so subtle it could have been an accident, but the fact that she didn't move away made it feel intentional. The warmth of her body lingered through the thin fabric of my shirt, each brush sending my pulse higher. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the elevator motor and the faint click as the floor numbers lit up one by one. I stared at the glowing panel above the doors, pretending to be focused on it, but my reflection betrayed me, my jaw tight, my chest rising and falling just a little faster than usual. Amira noticed. I could feel it in the way her lips curved into the faintest smile, almost imperceptible but there nonetheless. A smile that said she knew exactly what effect this moment was having on me. Sanaa shifted slightly, her hand grazing the edge of the railing as if to steady herself, and her fingers brushed the back of mine. It lasted only a second, maybe less, but in that second, the silence grew louder, heavier. It was just an elevator ride. A few seconds in a box of steel and glass. And yet, it felt like an eternity filled with glances that lingered too long, shoulders that pressed too close, and smiles that carried more meaning than any words could. When the elevator finally reached the ground floor, the doors slid open with a soft chime, breaking the spell. We stepped out together, but the tension didn't fade. If anything, it clung to me, heavier than ever. I realized then that whatever this was, whatever unspoken thread had tied the three of us together, it was no longer something I could brush aside. It was real. And it was only getting stronger. After that elevator ride, I couldn't sleep. The tension of it, Sanaa's shoulder brushing mine, Amira's knowing smile reflected in the steel doors, kept replaying in my mind like a scene I couldn't walk away from. By the next day, I knew things couldn't stay the same. If I kept pretending nothing was happening, the silence between us would grow heavier until it broke. That evening, the office emptied again. I stayed behind, my desk lamp glowing against the darkening hall. I heard the sound of footsteps, 2 pairs this time, and when I looked up, there they were. Amira and Sanaa, walking toward me with that same unhurried grace, their presence filling the quiet space. "Still here?" Amira asked, her tone light but her eyes sharper than her voice. "Looks like we all are," I replied. My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was racing. They exchanged a glance before Sanaa leaned against the edge of my desk, her fingers resting lightly on the wood, her face tilted toward me. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. "We can feel it. You're holding something back." And in that moment, I realized I couldn't keep running from the truth. I took a slow breath and spoke, my words tumbling out more honestly than I expected. "It's not that I don't notice," I began. "I do. The way you look at me. The way I feel when I'm around you. It means something to me. More than I know how to explain." I paused, searching for the right words. "But I don't want this to be something careless. Not a game. Being near you both makes me feel alive, like I'm seen in a way I've never been before. And I don't want to lose that by rushing into something I don't understand." The silence that followed was heavier than any we had shared before. My chest tightened, afraid I had said too much, or worse, not enough. Then Sanaa's hand found mine, her fingers brushing against my knuckles before curling gently around them. The touch was feather-light, yet it carried a weight that words couldn't. Her eyes softened, her voice almost a whisper. "That's not careless," she said. "That's honest." Amira exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding her breath. She leaned back against the wall, her arms uncrossing for once. A half-smile spread across her lips, but there was no sharpness in it this time, only warmth. "You surprise me," she murmured. "Most people would take what they want and think about the meaning later. But you stop to think about the meaning first." Her words disarmed me more than anything else. For the first time, I saw them not as untouchable figures in the office, but as women, human, vulnerable, and quietly grateful for the honesty we had all been avoiding. In that moment, the tension between us shifted. It wasn't a burning question anymore. It wasn't about stolen glances or accidental touches. It was about trust. And trust, I realized, was far more intimate than anything else could ever be. That night, after the honesty had spilled into the room like light through a crack in the blinds, none of us wanted to move. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations or sudden decisions. Just three people standing in the soft glow of an empty office, letting the silence rest between us like something fragile and sacred. Eventually, Amira glanced at the clock and let out a small laugh. "We should go before the security guard thinks we've moved in," she said, her voice lighter now, stripped of its usual edge. We gathered our things quietly and walked toward the elevator together. The tension that had once made the space feel suffocating was gone. In its place was something warmer, gentler. The kind of closeness that comes not from guessing, but from finally understanding. When the elevator doors opened to the ground floor, the night air greeted us. Cool, fresh, carrying the faint smell of rain on the pavement. The city stretched out before us, alive with lights and movement, yet somehow it felt like we were in our own small world, apart from all of it. We walked slowly toward the exit, none of us in a hurry. Amira slipped her arm through mine with a casual grace, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. On my other side, Sanaa reached down and took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine gently, as though testing whether I'd pull away. I didn't. For a few moments, the three of us moved together in silence, our steps falling into rhythm, our bodies close in a way that felt less like possession and more like companionship. There was no need to define it, no need to explain what we were or what we weren't. It was enough to just be there, side by side, in that moment. At the corner outside the building, we stopped. The glow of the streetlights painted the night in amber. Cars passed, their reflections rippling across the wet pavement. Amira turned to me first, her eyes holding mine with an expression I'd never seen from her before, unarmored, almost tender. She leaned in and pressed a kiss lightly to my cheek. It wasn't rushed, wasn't claiming, it was simply an acknowledgement. A thank you, perhaps, for seeing the woman behind the confidence. Sanaa followed, her touch different but no less meaningful. She brushed her hand along my shoulder before leaning close, her cheek against mine for the briefest moment. I could feel the warmth of her breath, the softness of her hair as it brushed against my skin. When she pulled back, her smile was small but genuine, her eyes shining with a quiet relief. We stood there a moment longer, none of us wanting to break the spell. Then Amira glanced at Sanaa, and Sanaa nodded with a smile, as if they both understood what words couldn't capture. And so we parted, no promises, no labels, just the simple truth of what had begun between us. As I walked away, I realized it wasn't about the elevator, or the coffee, or even the late nights in the office. It was about being seen, fully, deeply, without pretense. And that, I knew, was something rare. Something worth holding on to, no matter where it might lead. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. And if you think someone close to you would enjoy this, share it with them too. Your support means the world.